Good evening. Welcome back to the Bible study, Philippians chapter 4. We are almost finished with the book of Philippians. It's going by pretty quick. And tonight we're just going to pretty much focus our attention on verses 8 and 9 in chapter 4. And this is really a continuation of last week's lesson. And we're cued off right off the bat with the word finally. He says, finally, in verse 8, it says, finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put into practice, and the God of peace will be with you. Now notice that phrase, God of peace. We see that in verse 9. And then you can back up to last week's lesson, verse 7, and he talks about the peace of God, which transcends all understanding. So that's kind of what he's talking about in all these verses. They're starting really in verse 4 and following, is how to have this peace of God. You could call it being in a good state of mind, having a good mental health, having a positive attitude. You could call it that. You could call it having a deep, abiding, inward joy. He's telling us how to have these things. In last week's lesson, we pretty much talked about prayer. I called it a stress request. That's when you go to God when you are feeling yourself being worried or you're feeling anxiety creeping up on you. We're supposed to go to God with prayer, petition, and thanksgiving. And prayer, that word prayer, part of the shade of the meaning with that word is the idea of adoration, where you spend some time adoring God, lifting him up for who he is. That's helping you realize that God is bigger than whatever problem you may be facing. And then a petition is where you specifically tell God what the problem is, whatever it is that's trying to cause you to be anxious, what's trying to worry you. And then you spend some time thanking God for how he's taken care of you in the past. And as you're thinking of the ways he's been providing for you in the past, it helps you trust that he's going to continue to provide for you. So you begin by realizing how big God is. He's got this. You point out what the problem is, and then you spend some time in thanksgiving. And usually we don't tend to think about Thanksgiving when we're stressed out or feeling anxious, worried about something. We usually don't tend to think about, hey, man, I need to spend some time just thanking God. But that's what he says to do. Spend time thanking God for the blessings he's given you. And we've got lots of blessings. And so as you're thanking him, that's going to help you trust him to take care of you in the future. Verse 7, you get the peace of God, which transcends all understanding. And the imagery there says he guards our hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. The imagery there is of a guard, a sentry standing inside the gate, guarding the city. But God stands inside your heart, guarding you from within, giving you this peace. And then again, the word finally in verse 8 pulls these two ideas together. Here he's telling us what we specifically should think about. And as I reflected upon these verses, actually he mentions, I'm going to call them 6 virtues, and he pulls them all together with this, when he says everything is excellent or praiseworthy. He's saying we need to think about such things that are excellent or praiseworthy. You see, the mind it's very important because what you put into your mind is going to affect your thought life, and then your thought life affects your actions. And your actions can lead to your character. So it's important that we guard our minds. I think of that slogan of the mind is a terrible thing to waste. You remember that?
Mm-hmm.
I said that's one of the most successful ads in American history. And I guess it was around for well over 30 years. Helped raise money to get African-American students educated. It's a slogan, been very successful. And part of the idea behind that is the great potential of the human mind. So our mind is very powerful. In fact, the Bible tells us to transform our minds. Be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. And I think the way we renew our mind is certainly through God's word. He does not want any of us to waste our minds and waste our thought life. So as Christians, we need to be responsible for our thought life, what we put into our minds, because again, it does lead to actions. Proverbs chapter 23, verse 7 states, For as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. The word heart there is synonymous with mind, because you don't think with this organ that pumps in your chest, but your thinking, how you think kind of defines who you are, because our thoughts lead to actions. There's an old, I guess it's a poem. It goes like this: sow a thought, reap an action. Sow an action, reap a habit. Sow a habit, reap a character. Sow a character and reap a destiny. But again, it all starts with the thoughts. So with that in mind, let's talk a little bit about some of the mediums today that affect our thought life. As we're thinking about that, let's just talk for a moment about the word think itself. It's a verb. As you could say, this entire verse is governed by that little verb, the idea to think. But it's not talking about a quick thought that quickly comes in your mind and leaves. It's the idea behind think is constant thought process. It refers to continual reflection. The idea is to meditate upon. It's referring, to dwelling on something as opposed to a fleeting thought. And God wants us to continually think about these 6 virtues that are mentioned here in this passage, and they will have a positive effect on our minds, and we will have this peace of God, which I think we should all want to have. Again, like I said earlier, I think it's talking about having a good state of mental health, and that's why he mentions all these things. But let's talk for just a minute about some of the ways people put bad thoughts into their minds. What are some ways today that people put bad things into their minds? And I think you would agree with me that we do live in the information age. I've heard this age referred to that, the information age. We have a lot of information coming at us all the time. It's probably higher now than it's ever been, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
There's probably more information, more potential for damaging thoughts to come into our minds, which can lead to damaging actions. But again, it is the information age. And the problem is a lot of the information out there is not fit for mental consumption. I guess you could start with the television. I think you'd agree with me. A lot of information on the television is not mentally healthy. I came across something I thought was interesting. It says our living rooms, family rooms, and dens have become TV temples. That we place all the furniture and the chairs and everything around the TV, as if it's like a sacred chamber, so to speak. Everything's focused on the TV. And then
I would say one thing about this, it's the television's a big one, but there was a book on poetry that I read, and it had really good insights. It's called The Prophet by Khalil Gibran. He's a Christian, and you can tell in his poetry, one of the things that's always stuck in my mind, at least one of the sayings that he said is, make a house of meditation, not entertainment. And a couple of things that I've been reading lately, especially what's going on, and especially when you have, like in our country, and you find out in other countries, is when people are constantly in a state of being entertained, and that's the most important thing, and distracted. You can entertain, distracted, they go hand in hand. People really will start to turn a blind eye towards things just going to hell in a handbasket, as the saying goes, because as long as you're entertained, you really don't care what's going on around you, and things just going into the tank, essentially. But if you have room to meditate, like we're talking about, and that's what's happening here, you're meditating on what's true, what's noble, what's right, what's pure, what's lovely, what's admirable, excellent, praiseworthy. You won't put up with things around you that are not those things in that case, as you meditate them in your own life and what's happening around you, in your family, your community, your city, your country. But right now, so many people we're starting with television. I doubt we're going to end with television. I bet on your list.
Yeah.
And just no one cares anymore. As long as they're entertained, these things start to not matter. But if you do what Scripture's saying, you sit back, quiet time, you're away from your distractions, your entertainment. Your mind will start to wander to these things and focus on these things. And as you said, it starts with the mind, but then it starts to turn into action and then habits, your character, you are this at one point, you know? So that's what I initially think about this.
And I bet if we're all honest, we'd have to say we all think about certain things more than other things. And that the big question is, what kind of things are you thinking about? You know, like I have to be careful myself with consuming too much news media. That's just me, because I like history, so it's kind of like history being made. So I'm attracted to that. So I have to be careful that I'm not constantly thinking about negative things. Like earlier today, we were talking about Afghanistan and people being left behind. You know, if I wasn't careful, because I could sit home and I could turn on, you know, the news, whichever one you want to call out, and I could just dwell on stuff like that. People falling from airplanes and people begging and babies being tossed over the fence and all kind of rotten things, and people being beheaded because they're Christian, leaving weapons behind, and on and on and on. And you could go. And if that's all you're thinking about all day long, well, you're you've gotten away from these virtues you're supposed to be thinking about. And that's just one example. I'd say there's other people that you know, dwell on other things. Yeah. I mean, that are negative or that are not on the list here, so to speak. But we'll go down the list here. I found this interesting that the average teen watches 22 hours of TV a week. That's probably changed since social media has gotten going, but I'd say you could throw social media in there. It might even be more than 22 hours a week. What do you think?
I've looked at the percentages on social media and television. Netflix, start throwing that stuff in. It's the same thing. I'm not going to have my percentages 100%, probably because it's been 3-4 years since I've seen the statistics. But if I'm not incorrect, I think about 6 hours out of the day for a normal teenager. Throw video games, television, social media, about average 6 to 8 hours is about what's going on right there, which is more than half your day right there, essentially, are these things. And so whatever you do the most of, whatever your mind is dwelling the most on, is what you're going to be focused the most on in that case.
Yeah, it goes on to say by the time teens graduate from high school, they will have watched 23,000 hours of TV compared to 11,000 hours of school, in a small fraction of time compared to that in church. I had to throw that in, didn't they?
Right.
Think about that.
Well, you see
a little snippet of church, and then the rest is just
right. Where's the importance?
And then you wonder, why are people doing that? Why are they thinking like that?
Well, throw some other important things too. How do you compare church time? Maybe compare friends. That's an important thing. How does family and family time compare to that number as well? And then you start to find out where the most influence comes from. So wherever that influence is coming from, whatever thoughts are being pumped into these things are now the most important thing, and has become more reality than your family, your friends, or your community.
Yeah, I've got some stats here. It says for much of the material on TV is violent. And again, I think you could throw Netflix in there. And it seems to be on the increase. It says by the time teenagers finish high school, the average teen will have watched 40,000 televised murders and 200,000 televised acts of violence. One statistic found that 57% of all programming is violent. Of course, then the evening news, then we'll get back to me again, watching the evening news. Well, you know the old saying, if it bleeds, it leads. So they're going to, spend their time talking about stabbings and shootings and crashings and carjackings and bombings and et cetera.
Yeah.
That's all violent. So whether it's on TV or if it's on the news or whatever, we're still talking about putting violent thoughts in your mind. Now, as far as some things go, I don't think you can go stick your head in the sand and pretend like nothing's. You need to be aware. But get back to that word think. What are you dwelling on? What are you focusing on?
I like what one guy said. He said you want to glance at the problems that are going on in your life and around you, but he said you need to focus on the good, admirable things and hope. You don't if you dwell on the other, you'll get sucked in with it essentially. So I think that's a very good metaphor, I think, of how to conduct yourself when it comes to just your mental life.
Another on there says, then there's the outright sexual immorality that's rampant in the media. TV shows says premarital sex outnumbers sex within marriage 8-1.
Hmm.
And
You think there's a bias going on there, John?
yeah,
Hmm.
and it says TV viewers see a sexual act or reference every 4 minutes. TV afternoon, this soap operas coming in, 85% contain sexual reference and content. And of course, talk shows discuss this 75% of the time. On and on it goes, just this rotten stuff. I mean, it's amazing how.
If I'm quite honest, it's one of the reasons that I don't have television and I don't have Netflix, because every time I start a show, it eventually divulges into having some sexual act every few minutes, and it's like I can't watch this. And if I do, it's a compromise of my mental state, and then like Jesus says, whatever goes into the eye goes into the heart, kind of deal. So then there you go. It starts here, but then it's making its way in here, and then from the heart comes your actions, your character, your moral. So it has some type of working inside of you. So I personally, most of the shows that I watch aren't even made in America at this point, because everything that's made here, they always have to, that's the standard, pump it right in there kind of thing. This is, and then your mind, you start to think this is normal, this is okay, this is right, when that's not necessarily the case. And sadly, like, I mean, there is 8-1. There's a bias, and there's people who want you to pump this stuff down, and they want you to believe it. They want you to think this is right. So, which is another part of, I think, why this can be either such a great thing, like we're talking about your mental state, or such a bad thing, because it could define your life and your actions at that point.
Right. What do you think about where Jeremiah 6:15 says people no longer know how to blush? It's what happened in that day and time. They got so used to sin that they just got desensitized to it.
Right.
And that same thing can happen today. We just get so used to it, and mentally things going in that's bad for you. You just get used to it. And no longer blush. You're just desensitized.
Well, I think in any culture, especially even today, someone's going to say, oh, this is a sexual revolution, blah, 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 especially if you're a baby boomer or something, like, we're so new, no one's ever been like this before. Sex was always repressed. But then I would say, you don't know anything about history, because the Greeks had public sponsored orgies in public at that point, and somehow that became so normalized back then. And thank the Lord that that's not happening today. But you don't know history very well if you think that you're so sexual and so new or something like that. No, you're actually not. You're just immoral, like some other people in the past have been just completely immoral. Yeah. You're just going back to more of a barbaric state. That's all it is. And then the question then becomes, what is virtuous? What is moral then in that case? Because then you could even go back to the Aztecs where they're ripping hearts out of people while they're still beating. It's like, obviously people became desensitized to that happening at that point. That's not happening today. But there are other things that are happening today that are completely messed up. Like we just talked about, when Netflix or TV shows, or you get into abortion, where these things, we've just become desensitized at this point. Whereas in another time period, been like, whoa, especially a time period where God's laws reign supreme, whereas in some periods they did not.
We're probably desensitized in one sense, but it's having an effect negatively inside us. Nevertheless, you may be comfortable with it, but it's rotting you from the inside out. All this stuff that we're allowing to go in. So yeah, we may be getting desensitized, but it's just outward. The damage is still getting done. Profanity, we just talked about that. One study found that during 117 hours of programming, 72 curse words were used. I thought that was pretty interesting. That's a lot, and then I got all kind of stuff here, but I ain't going to get into it. But we all understand the state of the media today. It's pretty bad. I, I will say there is some Christian programming, some Christian movies that have come out. Like Flywheel. Remember that one, Facing the Giants? That was another one.
I've seen The Facing Giants.
One Night with a King. There's been some stuff, and of course, I'm very thankful. I think music could fit into this too. What lyrics are you listening to? What's going into your mind? What are you dwelling on there? And fortunately, we have some good Christian music today, which we didn't have when I was growing up. When I was a teenager, there was really not much of an alternative.
I'll criticize some of the Christian movies a little bit, though. I feel like they can do a better job than I think they're doing. Now, if you love Christian movies, I'm not against you, but let's just say they're not up to par with what the secular is, and if they don't step up their game, they won't be. They won't have a dominant influence in this country.
They may not have the money that Hollywood has.
They do, though. I've looked it up. I thought so, John, but they have hundreds of millions of dollars into these movies, which is equivalent to secular movies.
Yeah.
But
some of the ones I saw were pretty good.
And one guy on YouTube, he says the thing is that it's the way they think about it, and that's why I'm not against it necessarily. Like a lot of the directors say, these are like sermons in a movie, so they're not oriented somewhat like some of the other movies are, where it has more of a linear. The narrative matters more, whereas in here it's the message matters more, which is more like a sermon rather. That's what they said, not what I said. So there's nothing wrong with that, but at the same time, that's never going to compete against the secular, I guess, if that makes sense. There does need to be a vacuum that is, hey, these are going to be Christian movies. They're going to be somewhat similar in their stories, I feel like. And they can outcompete what's being pumped out by people who are not Christians, and not just not Christians, people who are anti-Christian and do not want the culture like that. So I guess for anyone out there who wants to get into the arts and into the Hollywood, we need more people like you to pump that out and compete against people who are anti-Christian, essentially. So that and one thing that I can think of movie-wise is that was made by DreamWorks, and if I'm not incorrect, it was before Disney bought them, and so Disney isn't very Christian, if anyone didn't know that, and they could produce things like Joseph, the Robe of Dreams, and then they can produce something like what's it called, where DreamWorks made it it's the one about Moses. They're both animated, and both of those are excellent movies that I've always watched since I was young. And I always go back and watch them, and that says something. If I keep going back and watching something, I always figured there's something to this that's really good. Yeah. And if I'm honest, I've only watched probably Facing the Giants once, but I keep going back to these movies over and over and over because they're musically well done, the way you see them well done, and they've even been described as works of art, which keeps you coming back and influences you. So I think we need, and sadly that's gone away as Disney has bought them out. You're not going to see something like that from DreamWorks anymore because now Disney has their hands on it. But I think that's one area where we can do better. I feel like.
But again, there's a lot, and don't get me wrong, I'm not against TV and media and computers and internet, but we do need to be careful what we put in our mind. I came across an acrostic that I thought was pretty good on media. And I put it on their screen there for those who are watching. You can see it. The M stands for message. Ask yourself, what is the message? What is the overall message of this, whatever I'm watching? Because believe it or not, everything has a message. Mm-hmm. There's some idea. There's something trying to be conveyed. E is effect. What is the effect? What effect is this having on me? I don't think it doesn't have some kind of an effect. D stands for damage. Will I suffer damage? Unhealthy fantasies, that kind of thing. The I in media stands for instead. This one really hurts. What could I be doing instead that's productive or constructive? Rather than feeding on whatever. The A says ask God. Does this glorify God, or would Jesus be comfortable watching this with me? So I thought that was a pretty good acrostic for media. And remember these things. That's pretty good stuff. Okay, let's talk a little bit now about these words, these virtues that are mentioned. Again, he kind of pulls it all together by saying whatever is excellent or praiseworthy. But before that, he lists these 6, I'm going to call them virtues. These are the kinds of things we need to be thinking on and reflecting on. First one is whatever is true. Whatever is true. It's the opposite of falsehood or error. We should focus our minds on integrity and what's reliable. I pretty much would rule out National Enquirer, maybe, or things like that. But think about, what is true, honorable, And noble's the next one. This refers to what is morally good, honorable, worthy of respect. Our thoughts should not be on what's dishonorable or vulgar. There's certain people and activities that are just not healthy to think about. That rules out a lot, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. And I think the thing is as we think about this, like you mentioned, it's not against media and things like that. Those are an outlet towards what you can call communication, stories, relaying information to people. I mean, we've always done that as human beings. So none of those are bad. But the problem is what you see is that what's being tossed out are not these virtues. I think that's the thing. Like I just mentioned too from DreamWorks in the past, which are not that old in the grand scheme of things, came out as I was a kid. But you don't see anything like that anymore. Like, are they a copy and paste of the Bible? By no means. But like they said, we try to be true to the story. That's what they say at the beginning. And they are. Like, they're not like, and to counter that, one of the movies I was excited for / disappointed with was probably, 2 movies. One that it was Noah, and it had, what's his name? Russell Crowe, which I like him as an actor. He was in there. And that whole story with that was all about how can we make Christians look bad? How does Noah look like a terrible person and terrible father? I mean, he's running around with a knife trying to stab his daughter in the boat. It's like, what's going on? It's certainly not making Christians look good. That's for sure. I'm just like, where's this divulging in as I'm watching it? And then there's the one where it's Exodus, Gods of Egypt. I think I'm saying that right. And it's got, what's his name, who played Batman in the Dark Knight series. And I like him as an actor. I've heard he's probably not the best person in real life, but I like him as an actor. And I was like, oh, cool. You're putting someone like that in there. And then you turn out, it just makes him look bad, just makes God looks like a horrible person against the Egyptians, and he's just a horrible God. And Moses is just like, why am I following this terrible person, this terrible God? And it's like, is this making Christianity look good? No, and then you find out with the directors, they have an edge against Christianity when they're even putting this out. So there's not even a respect for it. So, and those are just Christian movies specific kind. Well, the other 2 are debatable, but The question is, again, why are we not seeing things that are being put out into our culture that are, noble, they're true, they're pure, they're lovely, they're admirable, they're excellent, praiseworthy, and you're not seeing that. And there's just a lot of people in this culture who don't want those things, or they want to shade bad morals as virtuous, which is kind of what's happening now at this point.
I think people would respond to these things. I mean, like certain movies like Braveheart and some of those movies, or even The Passion, I think people really would like some of these things. But the Hollywood agenda is anti-Christian.
Mm-hmm.
So they're really trying to work people over spiritually.
Right.
It's just the devil. We're not wrestling with flesh and blood, as Paul says. The devil is behind the scenes, and he's the one at work. But I think people kind of hunger for some of these positive thoughts.
I agree.
And I think there's longevity too in movies that have wholesomeness to them.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even something as dumb as Mayberry, or Barney Fife and Andy,
I'm not sure if I'm familiar with
not
that.
familiar.
I think I know what you're talking about. I've heard of it.
Stuff, now I know somebody's going to say, well, there's Otis is the alcoholic, but I know, but still, things that used to be made were a lot more wholesome than today, and it leads to the longevity.
I'll say one thing is that I remember when I graduated from high school, there was a couple movies that I had watched and a couple series, and one of them is the Andy Griffin Show. Not the Andy Griffin Show. It was
That's the one I'm talking about.
Okay, well, I'm familiar with it. I've never seen all of them. I've probably seen an episode. But there's another one, I forgot what it's called, but it was made in the late 60s, though.
Gomer Pyle?
No. And it's essentially about a family, and I really just enjoyed it. It was just about a family
Leave
that
It
was...
to Beaver?
No, it wasn't that. If you say it, I'm going to know it. But it's a family.
The Munsters.
No, it's not the Monsters.
Okay.
But it's a family that's put together. You know, you have the mom, you have the dad, and then you have the kids. And there was just something about it that I just loved. And I
Brady
think
Bunch.
That's what it is. It's the Brady Bunch. I could just never.
Yeah.
And I loved it because it was such a different take on. It actually promoted just the feeling of the community of a family, because what's been pumped out ever since I've been his kid is the dad is stupid. He comes across as stupid, unwise, someone to be laughed at rather than someone to be respected, someone to listen to, someone who's wise. And that was, to me, to some people are like, what are you talking about? That's not a fresh take for you. Well, if you're a boomer, then no, it's not. But for me, it was a very fresh take on I watched the whole, like all the seasons, and it was just, I loved it because it felt very true. They were trying to promote the family. It felt like I was like in touch with them to a certain degree, with a cohesive family put together, just living together, and it was just kind of fun. I really love that, but you don't see that anymore.
Did you watch The Waltons? You ever watch that one?
I don't know if I ever watched that one.
You'll like that one. But anyway, let's get back to this. We have to, and the media is just one area where we direct our thoughts. I mean, this doesn't even have to even be talking about the media, really. It's just the kind of things that we tend to think about. But we spend so much time with the media. I do think it has a greater impact on our mind probably than anything else we probably think about. But whatever is just is the next one he mentions. This refers to thoughts that conform to God's standards. Here we would not want to dwell on injustice in the world, or even injustice that we have personally experienced. You know, if somebody has mistreated you or something, we live in a grievance-ridden society, and everybody's got an axe to grind. This group doesn't like this, or this group feels like it's been
everyone's a victim,
discriminated against, or being held back, or being oppressed, and all these, and it's not healthy to dwell on all that kind of stuff. As much as it may be woke and cool and all that, it's really not mentally healthy to constantly be thinking about injustice that happened 100 years ago, or 20 years ago, or 30 years ago, or 5 minutes ago.
And it's so true, because someone may think, well, that's unloving or something along those lines. And I like what one guy said, though. He said, if you're true to yourself, you at one point have been a victim and also victimized people, and you have to kind of gulp that down for a minute, that pill, and realize that that's a reality. You have been both in your life at one point, or you're going to be at one point, either one of those, and that's never going to stop. Now, what can you do? Long story short, let's focus on what we're kind of talking about here today.
Well, yeah, Paul would say, well, find something that's happened to you that shows justice, where you did get a fair shake. Now, think about that.
Yeah.
Let that be what you keep thinking about. Yeah, I did get an opportunity to do that. I wasn't discriminated against there. That was. I did get that equal opportunity. That's great.
Right.
Those kind of thoughts are like, you know what? I am so glad to be in this country. There's so many other places I could be. I think positive thoughts like that. Not this place is rotten. I hate this place. This happens. Women are oppressed here, and all these things. When really, look around, man. I mean, look at the rest of the world. Now, is there room for improvement? Yes, there is, but we need to dwell on the good, not the negative. Anyway, you could preach a whole sermon on that. All right. Also, whatever is pure, this refers to thoughts that are not corrupted, undefiled, free from being contaminated. Sometimes this word's used in a sexual context. We should not feed our minds on what is sexually immoral. Again, this would rule out a lot of media and certainly porn.
Yep.
Definitely don't want to fill your mind with that. The next one's whatever is lovely. This refers to thoughts that are pleasing, amiable, winsome, Thinking about acts of kindness, compassion, forbearance, even sympathy. Reflect upon kind things that have been done for you, or even kind acts that others are doing. This one is the opposite of bitter thoughts like getting even, criticism, resentment, that kind of stuff. Kind of what we talked about with injustice. Yep. Thoughts of kindness and compassion. Guess it'd be like Mr. Rogers. How about that?
I would say that was definitely in that
Did
zone.
you ever watch Mr. Rogers?
Yeah, Mr. Rogers, or I kind of think the guy that my mom used to watch. What's his name? He's the painter guy. These happy little bushes. What's his name?
Oh, PBS.
Yeah, he's got the afro thing.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
I just cannot think of his name.
It's kind of relaxing to watch him.
Yeah, but she was watched him, and it was always it always felt like this word lovely. Like it was just kind of beautiful, just sitting there. You kind of see him at peace. He's drawing this. He's taking something that's from a white slate and he's making something lovely out of it. And it's just kind of awesome. Just watch him as he slowly makes something nice out of this kind of thing. There's something that I always kind of think about is something along those lines, or paintings and things like that, images.
Yeah, but the next one here is whatever is admirable. This refers to thoughts which are wholesome and constructive. This is related to wholesome speech, opposite of filthy and foolish talk, coarse jesting, talk that does not contain immoral or sexually suggestive innuendo. William Barclay describes it as the things that are fit for God to hear. Think of that. It reminds me, think back to that media acrostic I mentioned earlier. This would rule out thinking about politics, wouldn't it? A lot of the things that consume our culture right now, all these differing views, right versus left, and this constant tension that's going on. Who's getting the vaccine? Who's not getting the vaccine? And all these things that we can spend our time thinking about that are just bringing you down, keeping you up. As Christians, we got to somehow get above all that and quit getting down in the mud. Does that make sense?
Well, I think in some ways, the way I had thought about this a while ago is I had a message on Thanksgiving to the youth, and it was not on Thanksgiving either. I always typically throughout the years throw in Thanksgiving type of teaching, even though it's not Thanksgiving, just because I think it's important because we're not supposed to be thankful just on Thanksgiving. And there's a connection between entering God's presence. I don't know if some people know this, with being thankful. You read in the Psalms, they're always like you're going into the temple with thanksgiving, entering the gates with thanksgiving. There seems to be this entering God's presence. Put that as a side note. But I think you're not living in reality. I think is really the real problem, is that you're focusing on all this. It's all negative, but life isn't all negative, though. You're ignoring parts of reality. So if you're doing that mentally, your actions are going to reflect that. You're going to only be living in part of reality and reacting against reality in such a way to where you're not in alignment with it. And I like what one guy said is we get all focused about all these negative things, and we should glance at them. Don't be someone who never turns on the news, never informed, don't know what's going on.
It's this idea of constantly thinking about these.
Yeah, the reaction is the ignorance is bliss kind of thing. Don't be that person either. But he said there's certain things that the media is not focusing on. One is world hunger is going down. Why aren't we focused on that? World diseases are going down. The standard of living across the world is going up. So you could sit there and think everything's going to hell in a handbasket, but you're actually not balancing things out right now with certain areas of reality that you need to take into perspective and focus on as well.
Well, their job in a lot of the news media is just to focus on the negative.
Well, it gets ratings. That's the problem.
It's not focusing on good things.
Right.
Now, sometimes I've noticed on I don't watch the major networks anymore because I think they're biased, but at the end, they used to always have a nice little feel-good story, which that's okay. It's kind of like putting a nice little bow in the end, but it's kind of bugged me that they spent 98% of the programming on the negativity and stuff.
Yeah.
But we're going to end on this nice little note here,
Right.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah.
I feel like if they were a little more balanced, whatever group they didn't like, be like, hey, we get on to Trump or we get on to Biden so much, but here's a positive aspect about him. Maybe you just didn't know. You just think he's just some evil, rotten person, but you know what? Here's something that we do find admirable in this person. He's not completely terrible person. You're being balanced again. Am I a big Biden fan? No, but you know what? He does seem to love his family. You got to take certain things into perspective a little bit with certain people and be a little bit balanced. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to vote for someone or blah, 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 or whatever, but you do need to have a balanced view of who someone is and not make someone, literally Satan on earth when actually they're actually not. And that's just one.
Let me take that back. I do watch PBS sometimes, so that's so I can get the left perspective. Because I like to see the left perspective and the right perspective, and then kind of see where I should go.
Yeah, there's some people on YouTube where I start getting what is CNN saying, what is MSNBC saying, just so you make sure everything's balanced.
But even that, whichever side or wherever you want to land, you still shouldn't dwell and constantly think about things that are negative or all these. Again, is it true? Is it noble? Is it right? Is it pure? Is it lovely? Is it admirable? That's the stuff we're supposed to be thinking about. And of course, the media, if it bleeds, it leads. All that, it's the opposite of this. So anyway, it's not easy to do in our culture today.
I agree with you.
Because we're bombarded with the opposite of this, which is going to lead to a lot of people having mental issues. So, and I think you'd agree we have a lot of mentally unstable people today. Maybe we always have, I don't know, but there seems to be a lot of issues out there. A lot of people taking a lot of medication to try to correct some things now don't get me wrong, I think some people do need medication, but there's probably people that don't need the medication. They just need to get right with God and start following his word, get their mind transformed through the word and focus on these things and meditate on these things and quit thinking so much about all these other things. Anyway, I'll close with that. How about that?
Yeah, I think it's good.
Our Father in heaven, I just pray that we would train our minds to think about what's praiseworthy, Lord, and what's excellent, and not focus so much on the negativity in our world today. I pray, Lord, that others, when they're around us, would feel encouraged and feel a positiveness that we have that comes from you, Lord. And I just pray that we would not be people that actually traffic in some of these non-virtues that we've talked about today. And I pray that we would all protect our minds, Lord, just as we protect our physical minds with helmets and hard hats and things. I pray that we would all go to lengths, Lord, to protect our thought life, because our minds really are a terrible thing to waste. It's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen.
Hi there, I'm John Wagnon, minister of New Discovery Christian Church here in Hernando, Mississippi. And I want to thank you for visiting our YouTube channel. I do hope you enjoy the sermons, and I hope the Lord builds you up through his word as I do my best to present it to you. If you're ever in the area, feel free to drop by and check us out live and in person. Once again, thank you for checking out our YouTube channel.